Hey everyone, I'm Almar of almarsguides.com, and in this video here, I'm going to be talking about the Mage class from Classic EQ all the way until the end of Prophecy of Ro, which is where I consider it to be the end of the Classic era. So this is going to be an audio version of the text guide that you see on screen right here. I know that there's people out there who prefer listening to videos, kind of like podcasts, or just watching a video, and this is going to be basically for you. The written guide is for people like me who prefer to read, and the videos are for people that prefer to listen or watch. So, mages are a class that specializes in summoning things, as you can basically imagine. And that includes a lot of things. They can do food, water, throwing weapons, bags, pet armor, armor for players, light sources for players, bags for players. They can more or less summon everything, except for a girlfriend. You can't summon that. So mage pets are very strong, and you can summon 4 different types: fire, water, air, and earth. So, a little bit less than Captain Planet can do. Each pet will have their own strengths and weaknesses. For example, Earth is going to be the most tanky pet you got. Air is going to be the least tanky, although Air does good DPS because Air can backstab. So Water is kind of a in-between. It's a decent tank, decent DPS. That's what a lot of people use. And Fire is your most useless pet. So the main quirk of Fire is you get a little damage shield, but aside from that, it's a glass cannon and not really worth using. The only time that I ever see people use a Fire pet is when they're leveling up, because sometimes that's your highest level pet. So, in Classic through... I actually don't know when Mitigation of the Mighty ends, if I'm being honest. However, in this early era of the game, a lot of raid bosses have Mitigation of the Mighty. So what Mitigation of the Mighty does is, it actually does a few different things, but the main thing that you have to worry about is all threat from your pets is transferred to you. So that's going to create a bit of an issue in the future, or in the early game, of you sending pets after raid bosses and then also nuking the raid bosses. It's going to be extremely hard for the tanks to keep aggro over both of them, especially considering how crappy aggro is in this early era for tanks. And if you pull aggro on a boss in, this era, more likely than not, what's going to happen is you're going to get summoned and then insta-gibbed by the boss. So that's not very fun. So for this reason, mages are going to have to watch out with their pets and how much aggro they pull on raids. And the last thing I would like to say that I cover in the top section here is mages also get very powerful direct damage spells. On par with wizards, or I should say almost on par with wizards. Mages and druids do about the same damage with their direct damage spells and can parse relatively equally depending on the situation that they're in. With those spells, I should say. So, attributes are going to be the best way for you to increase your character's strength until you start maxing them out in End of Elias, early Luckland, especially if you get raid gear. So mages are going to primarily want to focus on intelligence. That's the one stat above all else that you want more so than anything, with stamina and a tiny bit of strength being secondary. So stamina is going to give you more health, and the strength is primarily there for you to carry more gear and loot. So if you don't get any strength at all from Classic to, Velius, you're going to be able to carry 5 items maybe. Unless you get weight reduction bags, of course, that will change things a bit. But until you get those weight reduction bags, you're going to be fighting a lot for inventory space, for weight limits. And that's going to restrict you with how much loot you can carry around, which kind of sucks. So that's going to be kind of a situational one. Some people aren't going to mind, like if you're, 6-boxing and you have a bunch of mages, you're not really going to carry because you can carry all your loot on somebody else. So, to each their own, it's a situational stat. And then you can see here, too, that I also recommend other secondary stats for the mage. So, mana is important. Once you cap your intelligence, the only way to keep increasing your damage is to get more mana, and also mana regen, which is also called flowing thought on gear sometimes. And then, of course, if you're somebody who likes to solo or duo, I would recommend getting more armor class and hit points to go along with it, because you're going to be getting hit from time to time. So that's all as far as stats go. Now let's start looking at heroic stats. So during Planes of Power, heroic stats are going to be added into the game, and from that expansion onward, they're going to become more and more and more common until eventually basically all of your upgrades and all of your character upgrades stat-wise come from heroic stats instead of normal stats. So heroic intelligence is going to be the above all most important heroic stat that you're going to want to get, followed by heroic stamina and heroic agility. Those two are also going to be pretty important too. Heroic intelligence, though, that's going to give you the same benefit as intelligence, which is going to basically increase your damage, and heroic stamina and heroic agility are going to give you survivability. So keep that in mind. One thing to say about this too, as far as heroic stats go, is you'll kind of want to spread out your heroic stats a little bit more than you would your normal stats, because with your heroic stats, you're going to be hitting things called soft caps. And that's something I can hop into game and show you real fast. So I'm on live servers right now on this character, but if you open your inventory and you go to stats and then you click on the secondary thing here, the stats page, and you mouse over these under heroic mods, see this 150 for accuracy? That will show me when I mouse over it that for every 4 points of heroic dexterity, that increases up to 150, which would be the soft cap. So, and this is true for other things too. You can go down the list. Heroic strength, blah, blah, blah. Heroic intelligence or wisdom. And the list goes on and on. So that is important for you to keep in mind and pay attention to. Once heroic stats are added into the game, you probably don't need to dive into learning them too much. However, by Prophecy of Ro, I would recommend you give like this page a once over. Read it, learn what the heroic stats do, which ones you want and why. If you don't like this write-up, that's fine. I have 3 other write-ups here, which I link to, that will also give you information about heroic stats. Basically, at some point towards the end of this era, you're going to have to learn about heroic stats, what they do, and which ones you want, because they're going to be important for you to continue increasing the strength of your character. So now that we have heroic stats out of the way, let's look at important focus effects. So focus effects are going to be added into the game during Lucklin, and you're going to want a few different ones to increase the power of your mage. So the first and most important is going to be mana preservation, it's basically going to reduce the amount of mana consumed with each cast. Obviously, that's going to be amazing for you. And then you're also going to get this pet focus. So pet focus is going to buff the level of your pet, and that will improve all the stats of your pet. And it's just, pet focus is an amazing foci that necromancers, mages, and beast lords have to use. This one right here, improved damage. This is going to be your third most important. I should actually probably bump this up to the same tier as mana pres and pet focus, because it is that important, and I'll probably do that after this video. So improved damage, as the name suggests, it's going to increase your damage. Extended range, as the name suggests, it'll give you more range on your spells. And then, of course, spell haste, it's going to make them cast faster. Extended enhancement, this increases the duration of your buffs. Not as useful for a mage, but there are some buffs that you're going to have that you'll probably want to cast less. Like damage shield is usually always a 15-minute buff, so you can increase the duration with that. And then you also have improved dodge, improved parry / block. Both of these give you a little bit more survivability. And then you have reagent conservation, which is kind of minor for you as a mage, because not too many of your spells consume reagents. I think Call of the Heroes is the one that comes to my mind most prominently, since that requires pearls, and it's something you're always going to be casting as a mage, since it's, amazing. So let's look at this now. Important spells, skills, and AAs. As a mage, I'd recommend you specialize in evocation, because that's your primary form of damage. You also could do conjuration, since you do have conjuration nukes, but I don't really recommend that. Also, your pets do use conjuration, but I would stick with evocation. So, like I talked about earlier, your mage will get a little bit of utility along with their DPS spells. You will get things like damage shield, and you're also going to get something called a mod rod, which is first added in, I believe, Lucklin, and I think the name of the spell is Modulation Rod in that era. And then eventually, as the expansions go on, I think it begins in House of Thule. In House of Thule, you'll get an AA Modulation Rod, which replaces all of your Mod Rod spells. Until then, though, you get Modulation Rod spells. And at 1.2, you get a Modulation Rod spell that summons a self-only Modulation Rod, which you can use along with the normal Mod Rod that you summon. So basically, in the future, you'll get 2 different Mod Rods that you can use to give yourself extra mana on your mage. So those are things for you to keep in mind and to remember. So also here I bring up the spear line. You get the spear, your first spear spell in row, and that becomes your highest damage spell basically from then and forever on. Every time they increase the level cap, they'll add another spear into the game, and usually at max level, mages will use 2 spear spells, one from the current expansion, one from the previous expansion, and then 1 bolt spell to go with it. And that is their main rotation when they want to do the most damage possible. You'll also occasionally use your rain spells too. Occasionally throughout the game, I talk about this in this paragraph here. So actually, I'll jump to that next. So starting in Depths of Dark Hollow, you're going to get Raging Servant 2, which is a little swarm pet that you can send on mobs. I honestly don't know if the swarm pet is amazing in this era or not, because eventually in later EQ, yes, it is amazing. You do use it. The main reason in later EQ that swarm pets are good is because they get all of the inheritance from your AAs, your pet AAs. So all of the crit, all of the bonus damage, all of the, the goodness that you get from your pet AAs, that will transfer to your little swarm pets too. So that's what makes them good later on. Before you get all of those pet AAs though, I don't know if they're actually worth using, to be honest. So that's something you'll have to pay attention to when you raid on a mage, and pay attention to other mages in your guild. Also, once Dragons of Norath comes out, you can start parsing yourself anyway, because DON adds player housing. So I believe it adds player housing. It adds the guild lobby and the guild hall, which I assume player housing must come along with that. But it's that will add test dummies, and that will allow you to more accurately parse yourself, which was my point there. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is rains. So rains are a interesting line of spells. They occasionally are the best spells that you'll use that do the most damage, and usually when your rains are, I want to say when your rains reign supreme, you will be at the top of the damage meters. And the main reason that rain spells benefit so much, or I should say are so good for you, is because they benefit from the spell damage secondary stat, which is what I mentioned here. So spell damage occasionally appears on gear. As you get later and later into the game, it will be more and more common on gear until it's basically on every piece of gear. So each time you cast a spell, spell damage is usually added onto that spell, and depending on the amount, the cast duration of the spell, more spell damage is added. So I think a spell needs to be 3 seconds cast time for all the spell damage to get added to it. So the neat thing about rains is rains, each time the rain happens, which is 3 times when you use a rain spell. So it's 1 wave of damage, wait a few seconds, another wave of damage, wait a few seconds, another wave of damage. All 3 of those waves of damage will benefit from spell damage. And that's the reason that eventually, occasionally, rains take over as the highest DPS in the game. For you'll basically be topping parses during that time. So I know for a fact Secrets of Fader is one expansion where you'll be using your rains in that exact way. And I've also seen mages do it in Call of the Forsaken. I don't honestly know if you can do it in other expansions too, or how that all works. I know those 2 expansions are when it happens because I've seen it happen in those 2 expansions. I've also, in Call of the Forsaken, I have a lot more experience because I raided with a guild that had a mage from ROI, the best guild on Zegany, or previous best guild on Zegany. And I talked to him a lot about his rotation and what he did and why. And that's what I learned about rains during that time. So now that we're done the big blob of spells, let's look over here at our other spell lines. I mentioned some of these before, but I'd like to go over them again because they're some of your more important spell lines and spells that you'll want to know about. So shielding. All intelligence casters get a self-shielding line, and this stacks with most other buffs. So Shield of the Arcane is your POP version, Mystic Shield is the Omens of War version, and prior to that, you're going to get stuff like Lesser Shielding, Major Shielding, Arch Shielding. All of those are basically what I'm talking about there. So Mage Pets. As we talked about, you can summon a bunch of different Mage Pets. 4 different elemental types, and basically you're going to get a new Mage Pet with every level as you level up. Usually the rotation goes, I think Earth is the first you get, and then Water, Air, Fire. I believe that is the order that they come in as you level up. And it usually goes like that forever. So aside from the mage pet itself, you also get pet spells that you can cast on it. So you get things like runes that you can cast on your pet, which will absorb some damage. Ward of Kaliev, I believe, is the name of one of those. Pet heals. I don't know any of the pet heal names off the top of my head. Apologies. But you do get heals that work specifically on your pet. One of them is an AA heal called Companions. Let's see. Men Companion. There you go. So that's the AA version. It's just I'm pretty sure it's instant cast pet heal. And of course, you're also going to get your pet haste spells, like Burnout, the whole Burnout line. Occasionally, you're going to get a lot more that you can cast on your pet too, some of which are AAs. Like eventually, you get something called Virulent Talon, which is a kind of like a proc you can cast on your mage pet, and he'll eat through it and proc that shit. And you can also get other things. Companion's Fury. I think that's just regular crit. I don't know if that's the actually clicky one. Yes, it is. It is the clicky one, Companion's Fury. So that will dramatically buff your pet's DPS for a short duration, and then, it's basically like a burn for your pet. So those are the sorts of things that you'll be able to do on your pet as a mage. Your pet is going to be a minor amount of your damage, not your main damage. Your pet is going to be maybe 10 to 15% of your damage, I'd say, as a mage. All the other damage is going to come from what you're casting, so keep that in mind. Call of the Hero is, of course, another extremely important spell line for the mage. This will allow you to summon anybody in the zone that is in your group to you. So let's say you are all the way down in the Jug camp of Old Sibelius by Trachanon, and somebody leaves your group and you invite somebody else and he just zoned into Old Sibelius. You can Call of the Hero him down from the top all the way down to where your group is with one spell cast. Eventually, you will get an AA version of this spell, so you don't have to memorize the spell, which is also nice, because memorizing spells sucks. And in Call of the Forsaken, when the level cap gets to 100, quite a way away, I know. But in Call of the Forsaken, you're going to get a group Call of the Hero, where you basically summon your entire group to you, which is amazing. As a boxer, I use that spell very, very, very often when I play on live. So, damage shields. As a mage, you're going to get very good damage shields. Your damage shields are the only damage shields in the game that will rival a druid. And that's also one spell you'll always want to keep up on your group, especially the tank or whoever's taking damage. Modulation Rod, we talked about this a little bit earlier. Apparently I was wrong though. You get your first spell in Kunark for Modulation Rod. And basically all Mod Rod does is casters can click it and it will eat some of your health and give you back mana. It's basically like a Shaman's Cannibalize spell that is a inventory clicky, is how the best way to probably look at it. So Mala and Malocini. This is the best debuff in the game for you to use as a mage. People will want you to use Mallow and Mala on basically all raid mobs because it will decrease the resistances of them and allow everybody else to land spells easier, including you. So, in group content, you sometimes will use it, sometimes will not. That's going to be up to you because you're going to have to determine whether or not your group actually needs it. If your group is mostly melee, it's obviously not going to need it. If your group is out-leveling the mobs that you're fighting, you're not going to need it. But if your group is fighting yellows and reds and are having a hard time landing spells, Mala and Malocini are very good options to cast and to use. So last but not least, mages get something called Wraith's Strength. This is an aura that you get in Prophecy of Ro, and it will increase the damage of your pets and all of your homies' pets that stand around you and are in the range of the aura. So, this aura is 10% that it increases your pet's damage by, and it's amazing. You'll be using this all the way until Underfoot, which is when you get another one called Arcane Distellect. So, Arcane Distellect is kind of similar, but arguably worse, I guess you would say. Somebody might have to parse them better than me. However, when I played on live during Reign of Fear, Call of the Forsaken, and the Darkened Sea, we used Wraith Strength. We didn't use Arcane Distellect because we were under the impression that Wraith Strength was better. Maybe we were wrong. I'm not exactly sure, but I asked, like I talked about earlier, the mage that I knew that raided in Realm of Insanity, and he encouraged me to use Wraith Strength. So maybe that's wrong, but either way, for this era, Wraith Strength and all the way until you get to level 85, it's going to be what you're using, and it's very, very, very good. Make sure you always use it. So AAs. Since we're looking at our AAs, I'm going to hop into game because that can give me a little bit more details than what I'm able to give you here. So we're going to only cover the Clicky AAs as usual. And let's start looking at Lucklin. So Lucklin will give you this Clicky, which is called Elemental Form. So this will change you into either air, earth, fire, or water elemental, and it will increase your stats, casting level, and give you a damage shield. This is worth using during Lucklin, Planes of Power, and probably Omens of War, but eventually the benefits you get from this do not stack with other things, and that kind of devalues Elemental Form. Also, when you are in Elemental Form, you cannot mount, so that is something else that is a bit of a downside because that's going to make you lose the mana regen of sitting on your mount constantly, which is arguably a bigger benefit than Elemental Form itself. So Turn Summon. This only works on summoned creatures and nobody ever uses it. Companion's Fury. This is the one that I was telling you about that is extremely good. As you can see, it has 202 ranks in this game, which, as you can probably imagine, that means it's one of the main AAs that mages are going to be using. So Mass Group buff. This is a buff that turns your next group spell cast into a point-blank AoE to all around you, or I guess I should just call it AoE. And the main things you'll be using this for are Damage Shield or Mod Rod. Usually Mod Rod. So Men Companion. Men Companion will, as it says, heal your pet with just a click. Great, you'll definitely get it. You'll be using that often when your pet is in an oh shit situation and you don't have a pet heal memorized. Even your pet heals that you do memorize, if we're honest, they kind of suck. They don't heal for that much. Spellcasting Subtlety. So this will reduce the hate generated by your attacks, and this is extremely important. You'll want to get that as soon as humanly possible. So moving on to Planes of Power, you get 3 pet Clicky AAs during this expansion. So Host of the Elements, this is a swarm pet AA that basically sends a giant swarm of elementals at a target. It kind of sucks during this era. It does get better as time goes on. Eventually, you will use it during your burn rotations. Like, basically, when you pop all of your burns, you'll send all your swarm pets at the boss too, and then just that. It's a minor DPS increase, but it's worth using. Servant of Ro, it's basically a shittier version of Host of the Elements. Instead of having a bunch of swarm pets attack the target, it summons a little drake that shoots fireballs at the target, and that's significantly worse. Host of the Elements, at least that gains benefits from your pet AAs, like all of the pet crit and pet damage and all the pet mitigation, basically all of that good stuff, because they use melee attacks with Host of the Elements. With Servant of the Ro, he does not use melee attacks, which means he just sucks. He only uses that little fireball, and I do not believe that gains benefits from any of your casting AAs. So, Companion Suspension. This one sucks during this entire era, and the only time this AA eventually becomes good is when you can get rid of all the downsides from it. So, you can see here, suspends your pet at the current health only. It will lose its beneficial effects and any equipment given to it. So, that's what makes it garbage. Eventually, you will be able to give a pet fully buff a pet, give it all of the pet armor, pet weapons that you want, and then you'll be able to pop your burns. Companion's Fury, Virulent Talon, and you'll be able to do all of the burns on the pet, and then you can suspend it. And then you summon another pet, and you basically, do the same stuff to it, except for the burns. So how this works is, when you go to a raid in the future, you have your one pet, you'll pop all of your burns, and you'll go ham on the boss. Eventually, your burns will run out on your pet, and in that case, you'll basically drop your current pet and resummon the pet that you suspended. And this, when you resummon the pet that you suspended, that will have all of your burns, all of the buffs. He'll be basically fully ready to go. And then you can send him at the boss too for basically 2 pet burn rotations. That is the only time that I've seen that AA be useful. Other than that, nobody ever uses it. So companion shielding. It basically calls your pet to you and shares some damage with your pet. It's basically a oh shit button for you, but it hurts your pet when you do that. And it's not something I've ever used, and I don't believe I've ever seen any other mage use it. But if you're playing solo, I guess there are situations where, you may want to use it. So you can see there's, in Omens of War, there's 2 Heart of AAs. So this one, Heart of Froststone. This one activated absorbs 50% of spell and melee damage, up to 5,000 total spell or melee damage for a minute and a half. That one is we usually don't use that one. This one you'll use a little bit more. When activated, reduces the hatred generated of your spells. That one's at least a little bit better. I mean, technically, they both have their situations that you'll use them. Heart of the Froststone is usually better for like solo situations when you're actually taking damage. On raids, if you're taking damage, it's usually like an AoE, which I guess it'll help for. But you're usually not taking melee damage on raids. Some raids, of course, if you pull aggro of like little shitter mobs. But if you pull aggro of a raid boss, you're probably going to get killed. So there's nothing in Dragons of Norath, and Prophecy of Ro has nothing either. So that's all as far as the clicky AAs that you can get on the mage. And you can see this right here, Summon Modulation Shard. This is the AA that you eventually get that works as a mod rod. So going back to the guide here, and actually I did apparently miss this in Depths of Dark Hollow. In Depths of Dark Hollow, you're going to get something called Silent Casting. Silent Casting is going to be a very important AA that you're going to be using in conjunction with all of your other burns in the future once you actually get them. So now let's dive into the final section of this guide, how to play Magician Basics. So, as far as playing a mage solo, when you're soloing, your pet is going to be doing pretty much 99% of the tanking, and you're going to be, DPSing and healing your pet while he's doing all of his tanking. During the early eras, at least until Omens of War, I think, your pet will benefit from getting pet armor and weapons. You can summon pet armor, and you can also summon weapons. And eventually, mage pets will be summoned with pet armor already on them. However, no weapons. You can always give weapons to your pet. Keep in mind, since you're a mage, once your pet dies, the weapons and armor you gave to him will be lost. Even if you gave the pet actual items, they will still be lost. So that's something you want to keep in mind. So, eventually, when joining a group, your main role is going to be typically Damage Shield and Mod Rod. And then if anybody has any pets, you might want to offer them armor and or weapons for their pet, or just give them their pet weapons and armor yourself. Weapons are going to be the biggest benefit that you can give to the pet. Armor is very, very minor. So, I already explained Malocini and Mala. If your group needs it, they need it. If they don't need it, they don't need it. So here is an explanation of the 4 pets if you would like to read them over. I kind of already explained them earlier. Like I said, water is a balanced pet. That's also the pet that I typically end up using all the time. Earth is the best tank pet. It's also will be able to root enemies. Air does stuns, and it's also a very good DPS pet. Fire is damage shield, and it sucks. So normally, while you're leveling up, you're going to use whatever pet is highest level. Although, sometimes I will use water or earth over fire due to the downsides that fire comes with. I really don't like fire pets. One thing to consider, too, is the proc that earth gets, which is it's a root, but if you don't have any snare in your group, using the earth pet will help because it will root enemies. It has a very unreliable proc chance and a high resist chance. So don't depend on it, but it could save you in a clutch situation. So playing solo and playing in a group for a mage isn't very much different. You're kind of doing the same things. You're basically just like a very, very minor amount of utility and a lot of DPS. That's more or less what your class does. And after you finish buffing your group, buffing your pet, summoning your pet, and giving out all the pet armor and weapons, really all that's left is for you to DPS and do a bunch of damage. you'll typically want to cycle through your 3 highest damage nukes, and you'll also want to use your Swarm Pet spell once that's added into the game. So in this era, your 3 highest damage nukes are typically going to be the nukes that require you to be in line of sight and that shoot a fireball at the target. So you've probably recognized this before, and this is exactly what your, I think it's your bolt line of spells that do this, where they shoot a fireball at the target, and if the fireball hits something, it doesn't do damage to the target. But if it hits the target, it does a shit ton of damage. And that's usually what you'll be using for your 3 highest damage nukes, although you can change that up a bit depending on what spells you have and what spells you don't have. And like I said too, Swarm Pet, once you get that, 3 highest damage nukes plus your Swarm Pet, and then you'll just like repeat those 4 casts over and over and over. And anyway, that's all there is to it. I will eventually be adding a bit more to the more tips and tricks section at the bottom of this guide. If I forgot anything, left anything out, or got anything wrong, please let me know in the comment section below. And aside from that, I will catch you guys around in future EverQuest guides. Peace.